watch me. Hi, everybody. Um, oh, I miss you guys. All right, I want to apologize in advance to anybody who's in a very loving and peaceful place about the election. I'm not there yet. Oh, go ahead,
Excuse
Julie. I'm sorry.
I'm going to ask you to speak up because,
Okay.
wait a minute, maybe I can do this also. No, I'm at the top of so if you could speak up.
All
Thank
right. Can you guys hear me okay?
you.
Little soft. I don't know what to do about that. Um, well, hopefully I'm trying to yell.
I'm just going to be in the background trying to fix it.
No problem. Um, so as I was saying, anyone who is feeling so much love and compassion and togetherness with all of our fellow Americans, I apologize. I'm not there yet. So I apologize for that. Um, but that's where I am. And this is a place where we can come to be honest. Thank you. First of all, I want to say that first song was incredible, and James Baldwin would have loved that song, I think. So congratulations. That was wow, that knocked it out of the park. Um, as I was starting to prepare for the sermon a couple of weeks ago, um, I first felt that pressure that you always feel to make everything hopeful and all right and have this lovely bow on things. And have everyone walk out at 11 o'clock feeling, very chipper and positive about the world. But again, I'm not there yet. Um, so I'm thinking about what to do and I'm praying about what to do. And this sentence comes into my head, um, thinking about the majority of our fellow Americans. And the sentence that came into my head was, I know you are children of God, but I cannot call you beloved. I know you're children of God, but I cannot call you beloved. Um, in certain churches, and especially in the Black church, we call each other beloved, right? Jesus calls us beloved, and we call each other beloved, just in regular church messaging, and that's how it should feel. Um, but beloved implies a sense of, first of all, just safety. Um, I love you because I'm safe with you. Because you treat other people in a way that's going to create safety for all of us. Um, so I cannot call them beloved right now. Um, and for the first time, I found myself wondering if this country is a fit for me. But I know a lot of folks have been there, and I had this wonderful conversation with my brother where we both admitted to ourselves that we're thinking of other places, not necessarily seriously, but that we felt a push to acknowledge some fundamental things about ourselves, and about this country. So I just wanted to live there for today. In the off chance that anyone else is there, feeling sort of a fundamental conflict with what this country not has become but is. Um, so I started with Jonah because that is one of my very, very, very favorite books in the Bible. I was never that interested in the fish story in Sunday school. And that's great because that's, at least for me, the least interesting part of that book. So thank you always to our wonderful readers, for wrestling with a weird Frankenstein's monster hodgepodge of a first reading this morning, which kind of skips through the story. So I want to retell it and make it make sense. So this book is set about 50 years, generally scholarship wise, before the Assyrian conquest of a large part of Israel, of the kingdom of Israel. So we're in kind of 700 BC, 750 BC. I'm a big biblical history nut. So anyways, so Jonah lives in the northern kingdom of Israel. We're split into two kingdoms at this point. And you've got the Assyrians, who are one of the great and terrible empires of the ancient world over in what is today Iraq. And Nineveh is their capital city. It's today it's Mosul, in Iraq. And we're about 50 years before horrible, horrible things are going to happen. There's going to be a siege and captivity, and it's going to be awful for the Jewish people. It's going to be absolutely terrible, and things aren't great now. And so Jonah's mindset, as he gets this commission from God, God says, "Go, and yes, they're wicked, but I want you to go repent so I can have mercy on them and save them." And Jonah does this such a human thing. He says, "Nope, they don't deserve it. They don't deserve it. They are." I know two things. I know one, that they are allowed to continue to do what they're doing, horrible things are going to happen to my people. And he's not wrong. Horrible things will happen to his people. And I also know, God, that you're merciful. You're kind of a softie. You're gonna take, you're gonna let them live. And by letting them live, horrible things are going to happen to us. And I can't be a part of that. And so Jonah gets this commission, and what he does is he flees the opposite way to the ends of the earth. He hops on a boat at what is today Tel Aviv, and he basically smuggles himself aboard a ship to Tarshish, which is Spain today. So back then, that's the end of the world. So he goes as far away as you can possibly go, doesn't make it, get thrown over. There's a fish. Everyone knows that from Sunday school. So he gets spit back in Israel, and he realizes he has no choice, right? God is powerful. God's going to chase him wherever to get him to do this thing that he does not want to do. And so begrudgingly, he goes to Nineveh and he says, "Change your evil ways." And I have to imagine he's saying this the whole time through just gritted teeth. At no point before or after does Jonah have a moment of kumbaya with the Assyrians. He knows it's going to be, he knows it's going to be terrible. He has to do this thing. Um, it's funny, they're bickering the whole time. I've heard this described as they're bickering like an old married couple, sort of like Moses and God. They're bickering. Someone called it a sort of professional, sort of being professionally disgruntled is how Jonah feels. Um, so he goes and he says, "Change your ways, repent, do all of the things." And I'm gonna guess he's hoping that they secretly do not. He wants God to smite them so his people can live. And yet God doesn't do that. God saves them. When people talk about a wrathful and terrible Old Testament God, this is one of the exceptions to that. God says, "That sounds great. I will save you. I'll save all of you. This is great." And Jonah has to be so frustrated, because he knows what this means. And God saves them. And so after that, Jonah could say, "You were right. These are my fellow humans. I got to know them while I was there. Their hatred and viciousness and all of that actually wasn't that bad. We're having dinner next week." No, he's still angry, and he yells at God. He yells at God and says, "You did exactly what I thought you were going to do. This is why I didn't want to do this. This is why I ran, because I knew you were going to be gentle on them. I knew this would be unfair. I knew that this would be entirely unearned. And more importantly, I knew, as we said earlier, that the storm is still going to come. This was our shot to prevent the storm from coming, from what is about to happen to the Jewish people. And you didn't stop it. And so, no, I'm not okay with it. I did what you told me to do, and I'm not okay with it." And so the story ends not with any sort of reconciliation, uh, but the story really ends with God reminding Jonah that of two things. One, that we think differently. God says, "I love them. Those are human beings and I love them. Those are my children. And what God doesn't say is, I didn't ask you to love them. I asked you to go do a thing. And I made you do the thing, but I didn't ask you to love them. And then it's just a really weird ending. God decides to teach Jonah about love. And then rather than, again, having him, have like maybe a Romeo and Juliet romance with someone in Assyria instead, Jonah sits outside of Nineveh, which has been saved, and he sits in this little like mound of dirt. And he's so angry. And he's kind of throwing this temper tantrum. And anyone who's just been so angry, they just go sit outside in a corner, or watched a, 4-year-old throw a temper tantrum. It looks a lot like this. So he stomps outside, and God creates this little plant, and Jonah loves the plant. Jonah cares for the plant. And then God kills the plant, and Jonah's sad. And then God says, "You see, you were sad. I would be sad if they died." And that's the end of the story. It's such a weird ending. But the ending that doesn't happen is the happy ending. And the happy ending is they would fully repent and they would not do what they're about to do to the kingdom of Israel. Instead, 50 years later, again, horrible things happen. Eventually, the Israelites are taken in captivity and killed, and dispersed. Some people talk about those people that were lost today as the lost 10 tribes of Israel. Um, so awful things happen. It doesn't get better. It doesn't become okay. What happens is yet another empire comes along, Babylon, swallows up the Assyrian Empire, and kills and kidnaps and enslaves more people. That's what happens. And they live like that for a long time, and it's terrible. So the setting, to take Jonah seriously, it's a funny story, but also the setting of this in Jonah's mind, and he's not wrong. For him, this is Germany in 1933. And God says, I want you to go to that beer hall with all of these awful people and ask them to repent. And Jonah says, no, horrible things are going to happen. If you let them keep going, absolutely awful things are going to happen. And so he has to say, do I have to be a part of this plan? If I can't stop it, at least I don't want to be a part of it. I don't want to give them 50 more years. I don't want to let them start setting up camps and do what I know is going to happen. And again, at no point in the story is Jonah wrong. So there's this fundamental question of how much am I participating in this and what are my responsibilities, which is unanswered, and I don't have any answer for that. But it's an angry place, and I love that the book that we study allows us to be that angry. For the heartbreaking part is to see that broken promise, that we assume sometimes for those of us, and it's everyone in this church I know, who's been working to make things better for 60 years and 50 years and 40 years, and there has been progress, and yet today and right now and always it feels like there's this fundamental part of the country that we live in a country that we live in freely. Um, and that fundamental part breaks down into two different types of people as far as I can see it. And this is our majority of fellow Americans, unfortunately. There is the small minority of people, I hope it's small, it's not that small, but I need to tell myself it's that small, who are actively out there with burning crosses and making threats to churches in Albuquerque. They're actively out there, and this gets them up in the morning. This brings them some level of joy, is that active hate. And then there's the rest of America, and this is the part I have a problem with. It's the people who have seen that and been okay with it. To say, yeah, the neo-Nazis aren't great, but as long as my 401k is doing all right. And that's America. That's America. The guiding principle of this country is avarice, it's greed, and we are willing to sacrifice so much and overlook so much and co-sign so much to, as long as we are comfortable, as long as we have our stuff, um, and to do that, it requires so much, at best, othering and at worst, active violence towards our fellow humans that live here. Um, and that is heartbreaking. So when I'm really angry and I'm really mad, I turn to James Baldwin, who's one of the great prophets of our time. Um, and he's angry, and he says, he gets to a point where he says, I've lived in this country, I have looked at this country, I know this country. There's something fundamentally sick about this, and I can't engage with this country the way that I need to from the place that I'm situated. Country won't let me do it, actually, no matter how well read, well spoken, well, whatever, no matter how much I am not personally affected by it. At this point, James Baldwin's doing pretty well. He says, I can't be a part of it. I can't be that close to it. And so, as everyone here I'm sure knows, he picks up and he moves to France for a long time and remains one of the most important thinkers and critics about this country because he was able to give himself a sense of remove. But because he was able to do that, he persisted in telling us the truth about ourselves as a country. Um, and that was difficult and that was very alienating and very lonely for him, but he persists in doing it. And he tells us, if you want to know if we have the capacity for compassion, look at the least powerful among us. Look at the people that have come here begging for asylum and see the kindness with which we do or do not treat them. And right now, it's not a lot. And our fellow Americans are okay with that, and that is lonely, and it's very frustrating. A couple of weeks before the election, I made the absolutely terrible mistake of just watching television, just like turning on the TV and watching TV during the World Series. I thought, baseball, this will be fun. The Dodgers were in the World Series. Let me be a good American and watch this. I don't usually watch television, and I had to see the ads that ran from Trump's campaign and supporters about the horrible threat of transgender Americans. And it was one of the ugliest things I've seen in years. And I don't know the viewership numbers for the World Series, but tens of millions of people saw that and were okay with it. And that level of hate, and I hope that most people have not seen those commercials, they're hideous. But that level of hate for me, I immediately saw the old photos of people shouting at young Black children integrating schools at the South. And I saw fire hoses, and I saw dogs, and I saw nice suburban people just screaming hate and just being the ugliest faces you can ever see. And that was 60 years ago, and it's supposed to be over. um, and it's not, and it's so hard. It is so, so hard. Um, and these are the people that we're choosing to break bread with in a civic sense, right? Citizenship, choosing to live near people is a choice. We are freely choosing to break bread with and call these people neighbors. Um, and so I think about breaking bread, and I think about Thanksgiving, and I think about the first Thanksgiving, or the myth of the first Thanksgiving. And you think about these Indigenous families and First Nations peoples that are graciously sharing a table with, if not the individual people, but the forces that are going to lead to their absolute death, genocide, destruction, subjugation. Um, and it reads like a horror movie. The first Thanksgiving can feel like a horror movie where you want to say, run, don't go into that dark basement, run. Um, And it's that same fear that Jonah had, and that same 1933 feeling of you should run, horrible things are about to happen. Um, and so what do we do with all that? I don't know. I have absolutely no idea what to do with all that. But I can look to examples in our lives and our faith of what do we do. And the one thing that we do see Jonah doing during that time, he doesn't say it, but we hear it. We see him being fiercely protective over the people that he feels called to protect. His mission in this is so crystallized to say, God, whatever you're doing, I know what I'm going to do is try to protect my people however I can. My people and those people that I feel a responsibility towards. We see them getting very clear in, acts, and therefore when they're under threats. And again, terrible things are going to happen. We know how Peter's story ends. We know how Paul's story ends. It ends terribly. Everyone in the story dies. It's a horror movie. And yet we see them getting very clear on their first principles. And Paul's able to tune that out and say, okay, what are we supposed to do? I'm going to, at great risk to my life, go and stand with this church in Ephesus or in Albuquerque. I'm going to go stand with this church because I love them and I know that. I don't know anything else about God's plan. I think I disagree with it very strongly. I don't think I'm going to be wrong about it, but I know that I'm called to love. I know that I'm called to protect the people that I can protect. I know that I'm called to do all of those things. And that's great. And I love that. I'm also, and that's hard, but I want to end today with one thing, and this is what I love about this church. We talk about what you believe and will never believe. This is a place that allows for honesty. Our faith is the faith that allows for honesty. And that's why I love Jonah, because he is honest with God. He yells at God. He's just angry. And he knows that his faith in that relationship can hold that. So for anyone who's not at a place of reconciliation just yet, or feels that may be a long way off, I am grateful that we have a faith that can hold that, even when we know it's probably not going to be okay. We know that in about 2 months, we're going to have militarized deportations. We know that hate violence is going to be brutal and not be prosecuted, held accountable. We know that. And we're going to see those things. So when people say and tell us this is part of our plan, trust God, trusting God and accepting the plan does not mean that it's going to be fine. It wasn't fine. So many times it's been not fine, and this time is not going to be fine either. And that it is all right to bring that to God too and to each other too. It's okay to speak out loud. I know this is literally preaching to the choir with this church, but to say not just that I'm disappointed and scared and angry, but there's something fundamentally broken about this, and it's not getting better in our lifetimes about this country. And our faith can hold that. Um, and maybe our country can hold that. I don't know. Um, but thank you all for giving me a space to come and be angry and be scared and say that I can be hopeful eventually, but not yet. Um, but that this church has people that are going to Albuquerque right now to make sure that other people can worship safely, and that this church is doing everything that we can to protect people who are fleeing here for their lives because they trust us to take care of them. And that even if our country won't, some of us will. Uh, so we have a faith where we get to be on the outside for a while, and we get to realize we've always been on the outside of something that's very fundamental about this country. So I want to celebrate that mismatch. I want to celebrate us for that mismatch. I don't know a single person in this church whose guiding principle is greed or is succeeding at the expense of someone else's life. That's not who we are. So I want to congratulate us, as always, for not fitting in. And that's all I got. Thank you guys for letting me yell for half an hour.
Thank you so much, Jamarah. I am so sorry that several of us in this room could not hear you very well, but no, that's not your fault. That's on me. And anyway, anybody who missed it can go to the recording on Tuesday, and it will be completely clear. So if you want to do that, please do. All right, now we have 2 minutes to take in everything that's happened here today so far. I'm going to stop the recording.